Wits University's SRC says that they've received a letter indicating that they're being sued by the institution. The university released a statement on Thursday claiming that it had issued multiple suspension orders to disruptors who transgressed the university's rules. This follows the interruption of some lectures at the Wits main campus in Braamfontein in Johannesburg. Students embarked on a protest from Tuesday last week demanding that all students with historic debt be allowed to register for the new academic year. On top of the letter of suspension, students say that they've also received letters indicating that the university will be taking legal action against some of the student leadership. The Wits University SRC says that the institution has money and can afford to accommodate the students' demands, including allowing students with historic debt to register for the new academic year. Okay, for a little bit more on this, we're now joined by Nthabiseng Dubazana, who is a legal analyst. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. I'm not sure where to start with this particular issue, but it does seem as if rules and maybe even laws were broken by students during their demonstrations. Do you think that there is a case that the university can bring against students?
When we look at criminal procedure, I think that the university does have a good case against the students in terms of malicious damage to property, perhaps inciting of violence, and all of those things. However, if they're going to be issuing those letters or the arrests for the SRC leadership, it might be a little bit of a difficult one because they need to be sure that if they're going to issue to the SRC leadership, it's going to go to the collective. Just now, parts of the SRC leadership were not even involved on the days in question when the protest was happening. Maybe they were in the office or whatever the case may be. It will be a bit difficult to pinpoint exactly who is the person that damaged what property at what instance. The sad thing about such cases, wherein there are strikes, be it at such protests or in a normal work environment where there's protests, or even communities when they protest, when eventually the police are brought in and arrests are made, there's usually like over 100 people that are arrested. That number does tend to reduce as the case goes on and on and on. But most of the time, it doesn't even end up anywhere. The charges get eventually withdrawn from the accused persons. So it is kind of a win-or-lose situation for the institution should they proceed with legal action, at least in the realm of criminal law.
When you hear students saying that we vow to make Wits ungovernable until our demands are met, is there not a case for incitement where the person who says those things and tells people to protest and do what they do, aren't they then responsible?
I am in agreement with you there. If we look at the history, I think it's 2016 perhaps, when the last Fees Must Fall protest happened in the very same institution. One person was the one that basically ended up being arrested and detained, and as a result found guilty for incitement of violence. So because of such utterances that are made by the students, the ones who are particularly able to be singled out, having said those words, they can be arrested in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act for incitement of violence and all of those things, and perhaps end up being found guilty as a result and serving some kind of time in custody, unless, of course, the legal representatives end up, negotiating for them to serve things like community service and all of that in order to have the charges withdrawn, but with them having a sort of a penalty attached to their actions, but that doesn't result in a criminal record as they're growing up and going to get jobs in the future.
Is there a point at which internal rules of the university may be challenged to outside? For example, the university is saying that certain classes were disrupted against university rules. Does that mean that the university can take action against those students that did the disrupting? And can those students then take that to a legal process beyond the university?
Correct. So they can do that by virtue. Let me put it this way: let every institution, be it a school, be it a workplace, whatever the case may be, has its own internal rules on how they work. If the people who are being governed by those rules are not happy by them, they can take the said rules to a court of law for the court of law to review them and determine whether they're in line with the Constitution, whether people's rights are not being violated by virtue of those rules. Are those rules something that a reasonable person can be expected to abide by? So in order for that to happen, the students, if they're not happy with the rules that are set by the institution, they can have those rules sent to the High Court for them to determine whether or not they are in line with the Bill of Rights and all other rights that are covered within the Constitution. And if the court agrees with them that there are some violations here and there, then they can pronounce on that and order the university to change those rules in order for them to fit the criteria that is expected within our democratic society. Also, in the same breath, the institution can also take the students to court by virtue of the same rules, saying that these are the rules that these students signed upon when they accepted to be students here. So they ought to have been very well aware of these rules, and they've been practiced for so long. And therefore, we believe that they have a case to answer to. Can the court help us in this regard and show the students that, yes, indeed, they have a case to answer to, and thereby protecting the institution? So it can go either way, really.
All right, so that's on school grounds. Before they got to campus, there was a portion of the protest that took place in Braamfontein, and there were reports of businesses being forced to shut and also bins and things being overturned. The question there is there a criminal case to answer for those actions?
That will then depend on the municipality, because those would be the municipal rules. There is no specific crime for littering, so to speak. It will be a municipal rule wherein you are not allowed to litter in a certain area, etc. Because what you just said, that bins were turned over, etc. But businesses, if they want to take action against the students, it would be a matter of saying that as a result of their actions that day, they made a loss of this much, and then therefore they could claim damages against the students. But who in particular you're going to do that to? You need to find your defendant or your respondent in terms of whichever action you're going to take to court. And then that's going to be a difficult feat to try and determine if it was over 30, 40 people. Yeah. Are you going to be able to name them respondent number 1 up to respondent number 50 in order to recoup your losses, or would you just let it go? But when it comes to the actual littering of the streets and all of those things, the municipal rules would kick in, and the municipality will have a choice to whether take the action further in terms of criminal law or any other civil action that will be available to them. I think that would be the best route for them to take if they decide to act on it, of course.
All right. I mean, there are rules guiding society about assembling in numbers and protests and strikes and marches. Do student protests fall under these rules?
Not necessarily. They haven't really been a set of rules that have been governed by this. The protests have been happening a few times now over the years. I think they started 2004, if I'm not mistaken. But there hasn't been an act that has been acted to govern such things. The rules pertaining strikes and gatherings fall within the ambit of the Labor Relations Act and the CCMA and all of those things, how protests, the strikes should be dealt with when you are striking against your employer and all of that. But then there are also the political gatherings in terms of how, if you're going to do such a thing, you need to make an application to the municipality so that they can close off certain areas where you want to be protesting and all of that in order for it to be seen as legal. But this hasn't really fallen for students, because students, not all of them are 18 years and above, which will then fall within the ambit of them making an application to have such a protest happen and such a strike happen. Some of them are below the age of 18. So it's kind of a double-edged sword in terms of how we would deal with this situation. But in a general sense, yes, you're supposed to apply to the municipality and inform them that on a certain day we intend on having a march or a strike, and then we are intending on going from street A all the way to street D. If the police or the Metro Cops can assist us in that regard, because we're intending to have a peaceful march and we don't want this to turn ugly.
Is there also a vulnerability from the police in terms of litigation, because some students were injured on the day?
100%. You know, some students will claim that I was just there. I was observing and I ended up being hit by a rubber bullet, and as a result, I am injured. So now I think there is a case. The citation escapes me right now, but there was a case wherein a student did succeed in terms of suing the state for damages and medical expenses that they suffered as a result of one of the many fees must fall protests that have happened in the past. So the police need to be very vigilant when they are asked to come on site. They have to use as minimal force as possible, because this might end up blowing up in their faces. And when we look at situations whereby students, you know, are walking around raising their hands in the form of "we are not fighting," or they're making a body chain, it doesn't show an act of violence. So when you are the one provoking it, you are now actually committing the crime itself, where it begins with assault, because pushing on its own is seen as assault common. So if you start the pushing and then the student retaliates, and now you retaliate with a rubber bullet, you see we end up with a situation that is not very pretty in terms of the law. So the police need to be very, very vigilant when they are dealing with such protests.
All right, and that's where we'll leave it. Thank you so much indeed for your insights. That's legal analyst Nthabiseng Dubazana speaking to us about the various areas of possible litigation on both sides of this equation.